Hey guys, Frank from PBH. In this video, I'm going to go over the 10 things you need to think about before you buy anything for your Coyote Swap. So before we start talking about all these things that you need to go over, we need to set some proper expectations for your build. You've decided to do a Coyote Swap, or you're at least interested in it. That means you've probably driven a vehicle or ridden in one that has the Coyote V8. Now I got good news for you. The expectation should be this: it's going to drive just as good as that factory car that you saw it in, or rode in, or even drove. If we use OEM components, there really is no reason why we should fall short of any of the factory drivability and performance that Ford delivered in the F-150 and the Mustang. So as you're planning your build, one thing you should consider is trying to use as many factory parts as possible, trying to use factory computers, wiring, anything you can to make sure that the vehicle not only drives and performs like factory, but also diagnoses like factory as well. So make sure you pay attention in the next 10 steps. We're going to be going over everything from exhaust, fuel system, cooling system, to tuning, engine selection, and transmission options. If at any time you have a question, just post it up down below and we'll be there to answer it for you. So let's talk about the car you're thinking about putting a Coyote engine into. Well, the first thing you need to consider is how big the Coyote engine is. We're going to put up a link in the description to some of the dimensions of that Coyote engine, and you need to look at that and make sure you're going to have enough clearance in the engine bay for it to fit. Additionally, you want to make sure whatever front suspension system you're running on any of your builds is going to have the motor mount footprint for a Coyote engine. Luckily, the Coyote engine and all the other modular Ford engines share the same engine footprint, so the motor mounts from the 4.6, the 5.4, the 5.8s all fit Coyotes as well. Oil pan clearance is also very important to think about. You want to make sure that the cross members or K members that are being used in the suspension or is in the vehicle that you're swapping will clear your oil pan. If you have issues with clearance, there are aftermarket oil pans out there on the market that you can pick up from, and the oil pans in the Gen 1 and Gen 2 vehicles are all steel, so you could modify them as well. Unfortunately, the Gen 3 oil pans are composite, so unless you're really good with glue, you're probably not going to be able to modify that one. As far as Mustangs go, the Coyote engine fits a lot of them. 79 to current production, you really don't have to cut anything out of the chassis to make them fit. You go older than 79, you really need to study what's out there as far as aftermarket front suspensions, because you will have to make some clearance with the towers to make it fit. Now some of the Falcons, Mavericks, Fairlanes, Starliners, they're all going to be a little bit different. So definitely do your homework. But that first generation Mustang, we definitely know you're going to have to cut the towers out. You're going to have to put a serious front suspension underneath it to make that Coyote engine fit. If you got a Fox body, 79 to 93, it's as simple as changing the K member out. Luckily, Ford did us a favor and used the same chassis from 79 to 04. 96 to 04, they were all modular Ford V8s. So all we have to do is go to our favorite suspension manufacturer and get a 96 to 04 K member, and that Coyote engine will fit. Now, some of the suspension manufacturers like Maximum Motorsports have K members that are specific to the Coyote engines to put them into the Fox body, which makes the swap that much easier. So definitely check out what's out there. Don't just go for the first one you see. Look at all the K members out there and look at the different attributes that they have and make the best choice for your swap. If you're doing a Coyote swap on an F100, you do have a lot of chassis options. There are some really killer suspensions out there, but one of the more economic ones to reach for is going to be your Crown Vic front end. Now you can opt to use the entire frame or just the front end components. Either way you go, the Crown Vic's had a 4.6 engine, which is a modular Ford V8, so the motor mounts will work on a Coyote. If you have any questions about fitting that Coyote engine into your vehicle, feel free to send us an email or give us a call. We have dealt with a lot of builders on different projects, and we know some of the things that have worked and some of that have struggled. So definitely feel free to give us a ring. We will be more than happy to help you out with that. So when it comes to selecting the Coyote engine for your project, you're going to have quite a few options. You have 3 generations of Coyote engines available to you. Additional to that, you're going to have differences between F-150 and Mustang. Performance from the beginning started around 360 to 380 horsepower, and Generation 3 ended up delivering around 460. Now the F-150s were always lagging behind in performance as far as horsepower, but had a little bit more torque, where the Mustangs were high revving, higher performance engines that had less torque and more higher RPM horsepower. Your Generation 1 engines were found in the 2011 to 14 Mustangs and F150s. Now, there was a performance difference between the two. You had about 420 horsepower in the Mustangs, where the F150s came in around 380. The Mustangs had 11-to-1 compression versus the F150s 10.5-to-1. The internals are similar, but the Mustang pieces were a little bit more robust. So we see the Generation 1 engines handle about 700 horsepower before they have to get built. The F-150s, they usually tap out around 550 to 600 typically. Additional to all that, the Generation 1 Coyote engines shared the same firing order between F-150 and Mustang, had an 8-quart steel oil pan that you can modify, and they don't have any type of variable runner on the intake manifold. Now when we got to Gen 2, which is the 15 to 17 Mustang GT, Ford did something a little special. In 2012 to 2014, we did have the Boss 302, which is the Roadrunner engine, which all of this tech applies to. But what Ford did is they took all those beefed up internals and better camshafts and better valve springs, and they put them in the stock Mustang GT. The result was we had a horsepower bump from 420 to 435. The F-150s didn't see as much of a hike, only seeing about 5 or 7 horsepower, and they gave us a lot more durability. The Gen 2 engines can sustain about 800 horsepower, similar to the Boss 302s, without having to be built. In Gen 2, the compression ratio stayed the same between the Mustang and the F-150, Mustang dialing in at 11-to-1 compression, where the F-150s were 10.5-to-1. The big difference between the Gen 1s and the Gen 2s was now that we had variable runners on the intake manifold, which equated in us having these big diaphragms hanging off the back of the intake manifold, which could cause issues with firewall clearance. Ford maintained the 8-quart steel oil pan, so if you need to modify it, that's not a bad unit to use. And Gen 1 along with Gen 2 all had port fuel injection, which changed when we got to Gen 3. So for Generation 3 starting in 2018, Ford made some big upgrades to the Coyote engines. They bumped the compression in both the F-150 and the Mustang to 12-to-1. On top of that, you found that you had direct injection and port injection on all the engines. Even further than that, we no longer had a steel oil pan. Now we have a composite oil pan that can handle 10 quarts of oil instead of the previous 8. So now that you know all the details on the engines, it's going to be important to know what you want out of your build. If we have a cruiser we're going to be building for car shows and going up and down the road, or maybe going on some long drives, Generation 1, 2, and 3 are all great options. But if you're really going to be looking at the performance of the engines, Gen 2 and Gen 3 really stand out because of that higher compression ratio in Gen 3 and the upgraded cylinder heads and camshafts in Gen 2. So the transmissions that are found behind the Coyote engines in the factory applications are typically the MT82, the 6R80 automatic, and the 10R80 automatic. Now the MT82 is your 6-speed manual option. It is a nice transmission, but it does have some unique things that none of the earlier cars had. For example, it has a remote shifter, which makes installation into older chassis a little bit more challenging, and you're going to have to figure out how to mount that and get it to shift properly. Additionally, neither of these 3 transmissions have a slip yoke, so a CV style drive shaft is needed to make the connection to the differential. Additionally, 6R80 and 10R80 options are going to be very particular when it comes to tuning. You got to make sure that you're using a factory computer that can handle both the engine and the transmission to ensure that you have OEM functionability and drivability. There are options for standalone controllers, but our preference is to use an OEM computer, which is what's available in our control pack for Gen 1 and from Ford Performance for Gen 2 and Gen 3. Now, if you're not going to use a 6R80, a 10R80, or an MT82, what are your options? Well, just about any transmission, again, that was found behind a modular Ford V8 is definitely on the list. You can use 4R70W transmissions, AODEs, AODs, T5s, T56s, TKO 600s, 500s, the works, even Power Glides and Turbo 400s. Adapter bell housings have been available for the modular Ford V8s, so you can use those to adapt it behind your Coyote. So when it comes to selecting an automatic transmission for your swap, we are going to recommend that you go with a 6R80 or a 10R80 transmission. Now you're going to be able to use an off-the-shelf control pack to run both the engine and the transmission from one factory computer. You're going to have all the tunability that a factory car has, along with the durability and performance. So one of the things you're going to find when you look at the Coyote engine is that there's no power steering pump anywhere on it. None of the applications that we find the Coyote engines out of had a power steering pump or hydraulic pump for the steering. They all had electric steering. So unless you're planning on using the electric steering from your donor vehicle, which isn't the easiest thing to do, you're going to end up having to figure out a way to get a hydraulic power steering pump on the Coyote engine. What Power by the Hour has done is developed our speed drive systems to do this exact thing. Not only is it available for naturally aspirated applications, but it's expandable for supercharged applications as well. So once you purchase your NA version of our speed drive for your power steering solution, you're not sitting there having to redefine the entire accessory drive just because you decided to put a Roush or a Whipple or a VMP supercharger on top. When it comes to the power steering pump, our speed drives are designed to work with the 96 to 2010 Mustang GT unit. Now what's nice about using that power steering pump, it is designed to work on a modular Ford V8, which was high revving in nature, so it has no issues with the 72, 74, up to 8100 RPM that a Coyote engine is capable of. If you need to make custom power steering lines, we do have an assortment of AN adapters for the pump to make that a breeze. But if you're going to put it in a 96 to 2010 Mustang GT, you don't need to change any of the lines because you're going to be reusing the same power steering pump your car already had just by adding our brackets. That pump is designed to work with a remote reservoir, so make sure you're thinking about that remote reservoir when you're ordering your parts and where you're going to put it in the engine bay. That way it's not a surprise at the end and slow you down any further. So when it comes to the AC compressor, you could use the factory compressor that already came on the donor engine. The problem you may run into there is that that AC system that it came out of had an expansion valve. And even if your system does have an expansion valve, it could be a different size, or you could have an orifice tube. If it is a different size and you have an orifice tube, you got to be mindful that it may not work as efficient as it did in the factory car, because as these things change diameters and regulate differently, you could end up with a result that you can't work around or you can't fix. So what Power by the Hour has done is develop its speed drives to give you two different options when it comes to AC compressors. We offer you the modular Ford compressor mount, so you can use the factory compressors from 96 to 2010 for the Mustang GT. And we also have the mount for the Sandon SD7 compressor that's commonly used on a lot of aftermarket AC systems. If you're going to do a custom air conditioning system with an aftermarket setup, the Sandon SD7 compressor is the one to go for. It is the tightest fitting, so that'll help you in that department as well, and it's easier to adapt to custom AC lines. So if you're thinking about getting your accessory drive figured out for your build, make sure you check out our speed drive on our website, pbhequipped.com. We have offerings for NA and supercharged applications for superchargers from VMP, Roush, Whipple, and even Edelbrock. The Coyote engines naturally have a lot of electronics involved in controlling them. They have a computer that's running the entire powertrain. If you choose to load all that wiring and all that electronics into your project, that is fine. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. It is a ton of work, and if you're going down that path, go right ahead. For most of us, what we're going to be looking for is an easier solution because we want to just run the powertrain that we have and leave all the auxiliary stuff out of it. So our number one option is going to be the control packs. Now these control packs have been around for a while. Ford's actually been pumping them out for older powertrains, and we're using some of the Cobra Jet programs as well. What we're getting now for the Coyote engines for Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 3 are different options from different manufacturers. In fact, Power by the Hour Performance has a Gen 1 6R80 control packs where Ford Racing only has them for the manual transmission. Now that changed in Gen 2 and Gen 3 because now Ford Racing does have a 6R80 control pack for the Gen 2 Coyotes. They also have one for the manual transmission Coyotes. And then in Gen 3, they already have the manual transmission control pack out with a 10R80 version soon to be released. Now, what do you generally get in a control pack? Well, for the most part, what you're going to get is going to be a computer that's already got the passive anti-theft system removed. You're going to get your O2 sensors, your mass airflow meter, your gas pedal, and the body harness. Now, the body harness isn't going to be the factory one. It's going to be a manufactured unit that's going to trim everything down to just the bare essentials to run the powertrain. So once you've selected the correct control pack for your build, just know as you plan all the wiring that none of the onboard systems like your HVAC, your lighting, and even the radio are going to have anything to do with the control pack. Those systems will need their own fuse block to be independently powered from the control pack. Now the Power by the Hour Performance control pack is going to have one option that none of the other factory Ford Racing control packs have. We sell ours a la carte. What that means for you is that you can buy the body harness separate from all the other components. Now, where this comes into play is if you have a complete donor powertrain and you already have all the components like the PCM, the mass airflow meter, and the gas pedal, and all you need is the body harness. Power by the Hour Gen 1 body harness is available to work on both 6R80 and manual transmission options. So it's one harness that can do any combination with the Coyote engine as long as it's Gen 1. So by using a control pack from either Ford Performance or Power by the Hour, you can ensure that you're using factory components to get your Coyote swap up and running. So when it comes to supplying fuel to your Coyote engine, there's a couple things you need to keep in mind. Fuel pump, we need at least 255 liter per hour. Now, the factory Coyote engines are returnless, and most of the older vehicles that we're putting them in were return style, but it's not a big deal. We're just going to set a return style system up to work like a returnless system. The way we do this is we basically just pull the vacuum lead right off the regulator and set the fuel pressure to a static 55 to 58 psi. The factory fuel rail is a deadhead, so it only has one port going in. It doesn't have anything coming out of it. So the return line is going to be sourced from the regulator back to the tank. So with the return style system set up to operate like the returnless system, the factory computer won't have any problems controlling all the fueling and making sure everything works just like factory. What Power by the Hour has done is we've developed universal line kits to work with just about any fuel pump you have in the tank, hooking up directly to the factory rail, making it a breeze to plumb your fuel system. So when it comes to fuel systems, definitely look at what you're going to be doing now and in the future. Because if we build a fuel system for a naturally aspirated car, most likely it's not going to be good enough for a boosted application. So if you decide to put a supercharger on down the road, it might be the right thing to get those upgraded injectors now. Most tuners in the aftermarket, like the guys we use, which is Lund Racing, can tune that with no problem. But definitely check with your tuner and check with your builder as far as what fuel system is going to be adequate for your build so you don't have to buy things twice. So let's talk exhaust. The Coyote engines actually came with really cool shorty headers 2011 to 14 on the Generation 1 engines. Unfortunately, when we got into the Gen 2 engine starting in 2015, we found that one of the catalytic converters was attached to the exhaust manifold. So if you're really good with fabrication and modifying things, you can definitely go ahead and try to use those exhaust manifolds, but for the rest of us, we're probably going to be looking for an aftermarket solution for our exhaust. Long tube headers is always going to be a great option because they give you great performance and great exhaust note. The problem is they do take up some real estate, so we got to make sure whichever ones we're going to get are going to fit whatever suspension we're using. Luckily for all of us, you got companies like American Racing Headers, Ultimate Headers, and even BBK that have different header selections for Coyote swaps. Now, with any of those header options, you want to make sure that they're going to be specific to the chassis you're running, because there are room constraints depending on what you're using for a front end. As an example, if you have a Fox body and you have a Maximum Motorsports K member, you're going to want to look at the ARH offerings because they have them specific to that combination. If you have a first generation Mustang with a Detroit Speed front end, then you may want to look at Ultimate Headers. They have one that's specific to their Alumaframe. So across the board, these header manufacturers do have specific installation notes, but as always, we are dealing with aftermarket parts, and you may have to fabricate them or manipulate them a little bit to make them fit just right. As for the rest of the exhaust, there's nothing special that you have to do. You just got to make the connection between the header and your mid-pipe and go. All the Coyotes do have wideband O2 sensors, so make sure whatever headers you're getting, they have the O2 bung in the collector and it's not sampling off of one of the cylinders. That could throw off the readings, it could hurt drivability, and potentially cause engine harm. So let's talk about the cooling system on a Coyote. Well, the Coyotes don't have issues with cooling. Starting in 2011, these cars always ran between 200 to 220 degrees, and we didn't have any issues with the way Ford routed all the cooling system. But now we're putting that Coyote engine into a different chassis, so maybe not all those hoses and the fitment of stuff is going to work for us. Additionally, we may not have a heater, we may not even have a degas bottle. Now there are some tricky components on that cooling system. For example, the upper radiator hose, it's not a conventional hose. It's going to have a quick disconnect fitting on the thermostat housing, but on the other side it just uses a hose clamp. So if that upper radiator hose doesn't work for you, Don't fret, PBH has a upper radiator hose adapter that allow you to use a conventional hose with hose clamp on both ends. If you're doing a Coyote swap into a vehicle that had an electric fan and a good enough radiator for the swap, don't worry, the control packs do have controls to trigger that fan for you right from the PCM. One thing to keep in mind, the factory cooling fans, well, they do have a high amp draw. So you want to make sure that you have a continuous duty solenoid in line to handle that high amp draw so you're not melting the relays and blowing the fuses. Now when it comes to the degas bottle, you may or may not need it. What that depends on is the radiator you're using. So if the radiator you have has a pressure relief cap, has a reservoir, then you do not need the degas bottle to go ahead and fill it and properly vent the system. If you do remove the degas bottle, look at the driver's side hot water port. There is a port going straight forward towards the radiator that is meant to go to the degas bottle. If you're using a heater core, you're going to want to keep those heater tubes and just cap that off. But if you're not using the degas bottle and you're not using a heater, then you can use our hot water bypass kit to get rid of the hot water pipes altogether. So in general, you really don't have to do anything crazy to the cooling system. All we're going to have to modify are things to make it work with whatever our setup is, and that may vary depending on your use. So make sure you're looking over the entire cooling system and knowing ahead of time if you're going to have a heater, if you're going to have a degas bottle, if you need an upgraded radiator, all of those things. That way you're not sitting there in the middle of your build trying to figure out what to order next. So let's talk about tuning your Coyote swap. Most of the Mustangs out there in the world get a custom calibration from high performance tuners just to get that extra performance. In your case here, that performance is going to be a side effect from making sure that your vehicle is running right. Tuning is a vital part at making sure that the Coyote swap is done properly and that everything is communicating exactly as it should. In some cases, if you do not calibrate or tune your Coyote swap, you could end up with some harmful effects to your transmission or your engine. Power by the Hour offers the services of firms like Lund Racing for remote calibration for any Coyote swap. Now these guys are Ford specialists in calibration and can help you with anything from NA setups to boosted applications as well. Additional to that, they are specialists in the 6R80s and the 10R80 transmissions, so you can rest assured that not only is the engine going to run right, but the transmission is also going to shift correctly. So our recommendation for every Coyote swap is to calibrate it. Now you may not opt to use our firm or even our services, but definitely hook up with somebody who knows what they're doing to make sure that you're not going to have any issues or already have any present issues that aren't visible. These engines are extremely efficient and they take very, very well to boost, even with the higher compression ratios that they have from the factory. Now, one thing to keep in mind, that when you add 10 pounds of boost to a Coyote, no matter what blower it's coming out of, it's probably going to put down 600 to 650 horsepower. In some cases, even more. Now that power level is going to be about the limit of what you can make on pump gas. Pump gas for us is 93 octane. Depending on where you live, the highest octane you may be able to get at the pump is 91. Now we don't want to get into too much of a debate as far as which supercharger is going to be better. Obviously there's going to be different attributes for each style of supercharger out there. Centrifugal blowers typically make less torque and less punch down low and seem to really come to life up top, and we got plenty of high RPM to take advantage of that. Positive displacement blowers make power instantly, and they can now do it all the way through the top of the RPM range since the Coyote engine is so efficient. Either which way you go, Power by the Hour does have speed drives that can accommodate one or the other. We can help keep your supercharger install to a weekend upgrade. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching the video. There's a lot of information in there to digest. If you have any questions, post them up down below. We will be here to answer any questions that you have. If there's any topics that you want to go over again, we will have timestamps down below breaking it down by section. We'll also put some links in the description to some of the tech that we have on our website. Visit pbhequipped.com for any of the products that we mentioned in this video. As always, we ask everybody to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button so you don't miss any of the new videos we got coming out. Find us on Instagram and Facebook as well. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. We look forward to seeing those projects as they get finished. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to us through any of the channels we have available to you. Have a good one.